In this lesson, we'll learn how to draw breasts on our female subject. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so we'll go ahead and zoom in here and we'll focus on the torso once again, where we will begin drawing in the breasts on our female subject. But first, what I'd like to show you is basically an incorrect example of what breasts should not look like. So over here, my layers panel, I have a layer which I've titled Wrong Breasts. So go ahead and turn on the visibility for that. And here we can see a basic example of how they should not look. At first glance, these breasts appear to be almost perfect circles. And you can almost imagine that they were intended to look like perfect orbs, which you don't want that. Breasts are very much affected by gravity, and these breasts appear to be very gravity defiant. And breasts don't normally form like this cleavage like we would have, like we have here, unless there's an external force being forced on them or pushing them upward. Another example of the breasts being affected by gravity is you're not going to have this perfect arc coming out right out of the armpit area like this. Breasts are more teardrop shaped, and so you're going to have a different kind of gradual, kind of almost S-curve coming off of this area over here. We're going to actually illustrate that when we redraw out the breasts. Another thing to make note of is the placement of the nipples. They're very much perfectly centered. Now, female nipples are more centered than, say, a male's nipples, but these are too extreme in their being centered on these these circles or these orbs. And then finally, breasts don't point perfectly straight forward outward. They kind of point out at an angle. So having these nipples being perfectly centered really kills that illusion as to the direction they should be pointing. So you want them kind of being pointed outward just a little bit. And all that, again, has a lot to do with gravity. So enough about this incorrect example. We'll go ahead and turn off the visibility for that. And we're basically on our layer below, which I've titled breast. We'll start drawing in how the breast should look. So just grabbing my brush tool over here in the tool panel, and we'll just kind of focus on this left breast over here. So I like to kind of start out up here, kind of around the armpit area. So somewhere right about there. And like I said, you kind of want to start out, we don't want to have a perfect arc like we had over here. We want to kind of start out kind of with an S shape like this. Again, they're being affected by gravity, so we really want to illustrate that. Now, how much mass makes up your breast, that's going to be up to you. The more mass you have, the more overlap we're going to have where you see them kind of coming out to the side over here. So we may have something kind of like that. And as far as how far down they come, I mean, that can really vary. That a lot of that depends on age. The older the subject, the farther down they could be hanging. But generally, you could kind of think of them as the bottom of the breast kind of starting to line up with the midpoint of the bicep. So something kind of right about there. Okay? So that's already looking a lot better than this example. So we can kind of come around on the opposite end over here on the screen right and start to work in our breast over here. And you'll notice I'm not creating like this cleavage line in the center because, again, breasts aren't going to naturally just do that. Again, they're not gravity defiant. Now, if there was an external force, like if she was wearing a push-up bra or some sort of garment that was pushing them upward or together, then yeah, you would have that. You would have that line. But by themselves, you're just not going to have that, unless there's been some sort of cosmetic surgery that's gone on, some extreme cosmetic operation that's forcing them to do that. Okay, so just making another comparison here, we can already see how this example looks a lot more natural. Now let's kind of focus on where do we place the nipples on these particular breasts. Again, on our bad example, they're perfectly centered, and that just doesn't look right. Breasts don't point outward perfectly straight forward. They kind of point out on an angle, and where we place the nipples is going to help further illustrate that. So let's go ahead and hide our bad example once again. And you'll notice right here I've got in our layers panel another layer which I've titled Nipple Guide. So I'm going to go ahead and turn on the visibility for that. And we're going to come back and start talking about this T shape, this T that we basically placed in lesson 2. And again, that T really is paramount in how we place other parts of the body, especially here on the torso. So we're basically coming back to that intersection point right here where that horizontal line of the T crosses with the vertical line. And if we just take a couple of lines and come from that intersection point coming outward at about a 45-degree angle or so, we can kind of start to gauge where our nipples might be placed on our breasts. So I've already kind of started to do that, and so we can kind of follow that, and just kind of coming out from those markers, we can kind of start to gauge where the nipples would be placed on our breasts here. May want to kind of bring that one up just a little. Okay, let's go ahead and hide that nipple guide real quick, and we can already see that this feels a lot more appropriate than that, where they're perfectly centered. So we want to create the illusion, if you can imagine, this breast is very much shaped like a teardrop. If we kind of come over it like this with another line, we can kind of start to see how that line falls over the breast. So it's not a perfect arc. It's kind of like a teardrop. And we're going to further illustrate this in the next lesson, where we're going to have a variety of different poses where we'll draw the breast at kind of a 3/4 view, a side view, and then we'll also explore how the breast would look under a couple of different circumstances, like what do they look like when she's raising her arms, or if she's got a bra on, how will they look like then? So this is basically one way to get started drawing more accurate breasts on a female. So again, in the next lesson, we'll continue our discussion and learning about how to draw breasts. So we'll see you then.